President Biden's kind of been a little tongue-tied when it comes to China.
They see us in a very weak position, and that's unfortunate.
What do you think the U.S. needs to do to keep Taiwan safe?
We need to have strong, steady, and strategic leadership when it comes to national defense and military foreign policy.
Russia test-fired a new intercontinental ballistic missile today after announcing that it was suspending adherence of the last nuclear arms control agreement. At the same time, Vladimir Putin is still shopping globally for more arms to fight Ukraine. But it is China that is drawing even more attention as it appears to be gearing up for a takeover of Taiwan and goodness knows what else. So tonight, we begin with a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, just back from an extended visit to the Indo-Pacific region, including Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Congressman Nathaniel Moran, welcome to Centerpoint.
Rob, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're a freshman. You got on this CODEL trip, congressional delegation, bipartisan. What did you hear and see on this trip? And take us inside the room a little bit, you know, with your conversations with some of these foreign leaders. What are their big concerns, especially as it relates to China?
This was a very, very eye-opening experience for me. One of two freshmen and one of 9 congressional members that got to go on this CODEL overseas. While we were over there, we were able to meet with the leaders in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. And at each stop, there were some similar themes. And one of the themes that we heard over and over again was, can we depend on the United States? In fact, when we talked to those in China, those in Japan, and those in South Korea about this threat from China towards Taiwan, the response across the board really was, well, our response is going to be dependent on how aggressive and how firm the United States is willing to stand on behalf of Taiwan. There's no question there's an existential threat here. China has made no bones. They're after Taiwan, and they're willing to take it at any means, whether or not that's from a political takeover, maybe next year in the elections there, or an economic takeover, or if necessary, a military takeover.
One of the most important votes, probably the most important vote you would ever have to take in Congress, is a declaration of war. What do you think the U.S. needs to do to keep Taiwan safe?
Well, we know the principle of peace through strength. We want to avoid a military conflict. What we want in that region is peace and stability and prosperity and freedom for those nations. But in order to get there, in order to avoid a military conflict, we have to win on the diplomatic front. We have to win on the economic front. And right now, especially on the economic front, we are getting beat by China. We know that China, through its Belts and Roads initiative, is investing in countries across the world. They're making countries economically dependent on them, including the countries that we need to be allies in that Indo-Pacific region. India, Korea, the Philippines. They're having that economic tight hold on them in so many different ways. And that's preventing those countries from making the diplomatic and the military decisions that we need them to make so that we can all avoid a military conflict with China over Taiwan.
So China has been playing some war games. You know, they had some threatening words for the U.S. after Speaker McCarthy met with the Taiwanese president in California. Your trip there, you met with the Taiwanese legislature. First time American legislators have done that in 44 years. Do you think President Xi is starting to go after the U.S., at least rhetorically right now, because he thinks the U.S. has been weakened?
There's no question about that. When we look at what happened with the Chinese spy balloon, going back to the weak withdrawal of Afghanistan and the debacle that was, and then we see how really China is using the war in Ukraine as a proxy conflict and a test site for what they want to do in Taiwan, and they're measuring what kind of response they want to make in Taiwan based on how we are responding across the globe. They see us in a very weak position, and that's unfortunate. President Tsai from Taiwan, after she met with Kevin McCarthy in California, flew back to Taiwan, and our delegation was privileged enough to spend 3 hours with her last Saturday. And it is clear that she has a firm resolve to defend Taiwan, but they cannot do it alone. It's a David and Goliath scenario. They need other countries to stand with them, and that first primary line of defense is having the United States stand strongly and firmly and go ahead and say that clearly now by providing weapon systems, by providing training, by building additional economic ties to Taiwan. So that, again, the end result is we avoid a military conflict there. We say firmly to China, don't dare come across the Taiwanese Strait.
Does she believe that Taiwan will be invaded by China? Do you believe that?
Well, here's what I think is going to happen is I think China is going to work diligently between now and next year's elections in Taiwan to do a political coup, much like what you saw in Hong Kong, to try to take the country over politically without firing a shot. If that doesn't work in the 2024 election cycle next year in Taiwan, then you're likely going to see a blockade. And whether or not that then provides the relief that China wants and the alliance that it wants, then if it doesn't, then I think you're likely going to see by 2025 the real possibility of a military conflict there. We have to win on the political, diplomatic, and economic front first. If we do that, we can avoid a military conflict there, and we can provide peace, stability, freedom in that country that needs to happen long term.
So here at home, President Biden's kind of been a little tongue-tied when it comes to China. Do you think that that is because of some of the problems he's facing with his family taking money from China businesses? Do you think that's kind of holding back his response or even America's response?
It's kind of awkward position for him to be in, clearly, and I do think that it has some impact. But I think the greater driving force behind President Biden at this point is that he just is weak in foreign policy and national defense strategy altogether. I've said from the very beginning, we need to have strong, steady, and strategic leadership when it comes to national defense and military foreign policy. The Biden administration, regardless of whether or not it's China or some other country, has just not shown the willingness to do that. In the absence of the United States leading in this world, there is a vacuum. That vacuum is going to be filled by China if we do not get our ship straight. We see China wanting to dominate us economically and have the yuan replace the dollar across the world. We see China wanting to build into countries in Africa and South America in particular to have their foreign policy dictated by those relationships. We see China interjecting into foreign policy matters in the Middle East and brokering deals between countries, things that we used to do. But because we pulled out, now there's this vacuum. Now China is filling that vacuum.
So a National Guardsman was arrested today in the massive intelligence leak. From what you know, how does this play into our standoff with Russia in Ukraine?
We'll just have to wait and see. I know some of those documents are yet to be authenticated as to whether or not they're correct or not. But make no mistake here, there's a growing national security issue, not just in Ukraine, not just in China, not just in Iran, but now we're seeing a growing axis of evil. And it's a growing axis of evil. It is countries that have lost their moral guidance and moral compass that want to impose totalitarianism instead of freedom. They want to have a rule of force instead of a rule of law. They want to have no democracy in that land where there's freedom and liberty and the ability to exercise free religious beliefs, but in fact, they want to impose their own religious beliefs through a communist system that is apathetic, really, in that regard. So we don't want to see that happen. We want countries to have liberty across this world. We can't do everything in this world, and we can't be the world's policeman. But certainly, the growing axis of evil is creating a situation for us long term that is going to be a problem for America if we just sit back on the sidelines.
Congressman Moran, thanks so much for joining us from your East Texas district. We appreciate you being on Centerpoint.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.